A mother leaves for work on an ordinary Tuesday morning. She texts her 15-year-old daughter that afternoon, gets a normal reply, and thinks nothing more of it. Hours later, she pulls into her own driveway, walks through her own front door, and finds both of her children shot to death inside the house. Her 9-year-old son is lying near the hallway. Her 15-year-old daughter is in her bed. There are bullet holes in the front of the house. There is no broken lock, no shattered window, no sign that anyone forced their way inside. Whoever did this either already had a key to this family's trust, or they never needed one at all. That is not a hypothetical. That is exactly what happened on Tallis Road in Gwynn Oak, Maryland, on the evening of July 7, 2026. And over the next 2.5 weeks, investigators would quietly build a case that ended with a 16-year-old boy in handcuffs, charged as an adult with 2 counts of first-degree murder. What makes this case so hard to shake isn't just the age of the victims, or the age of the person accused of killing them. It's how ordinary everything looked right up until the moment it wasn't. So, let's walk through exactly what happened, in the order investigators say it happened, using the timeline they laid out themselves in charging documents, court hearings, and public statements. Tallis Road sits in Gwynn Oak, an unincorporated community in Baltimore County, just west of the Baltimore City line. It is, by every account from the people who live there, a quiet stretch. Neighbors describe a place where people walk, where kids play outside, where the biggest disturbances on a normal week involve speeding cars or music turned up too loud too late. One longtime resident, who has lived in the area for roughly 3 decades, said he had never seen anything like this happen anywhere near his home. That context matters, because it tells you this wasn't a neighborhood already bracing for violence. It was a neighborhood that had to be told, all at once, that violence had already arrived, and that it had arrived inside one of their own houses. The family at the center of this story had only been living on that block for a matter of months. They were new to the street, still settling in, still becoming familiar faces rather than established ones. And then, on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday evening, their home became the center of one of the most disturbing crime scenes Baltimore County had seen in years. According to charging documents, the events of July 7th can be reconstructed almost minute by minute because so much of what happened that afternoon was captured on camera somewhere. Just after 4 in the afternoon, surveillance footage from the local transit system shows a 16-year-old boy getting off an MTA bus at Liberty Road and Tulsa Road, a stop roughly half a mile from Giovanna's home. That drop-off happened at approximately 4:14 p.m. 2 minutes later, at 4:16, neighborhood surveillance footage allegedly picked him up again, walking closer to the house on Tallis Road. He was described in the footage as wearing a black t-shirt, black shorts, black and white shoes, a backpack, and a distinctive pair of light blue headphones. At 4:19, cell phone records show a call placed to Giovanna's phone. Investigators separately noted that the cell number linked to him came into the immediate area of the crime scene at approximately 4:22. Then comes the detail that anchors the entire timeline. A neighbor near the home was captured on a home surveillance camera, turning to look toward the house at approximately 5:08 in the evening. That single timestamp, a neighbor's head turning toward a sound, is what investigators now believe marks the moment the shooting actually took place. About an hour after that, surveillance footage tracked someone walking down a steep dirt hill on a nearby street called Crismer Court, then running across Flannery Lane. This time, the clothing had changed entirely. Instead of the black t-shirt and shorts from earlier, the person in this footage was wearing a long-sleeved black jacket with the hood pulled up, along with a black covering over the face. That figure continued on foot into Baltimore City and boarded another MTA bus at North Rogers Avenue and Northern Parkway at approximately 5:45 p.m. It's the layering of these details, half a mile from the bus stop to the house, a phone call at 4:19, a neighbor's glance at 5:08, a change of clothes, and a disguised face an hour later, that investigators say ties one continuous chain of movement to the murders. The backpack stayed the same. The shoes stayed the same. The headphones stayed the same. Only the outer layer changed, in what police describe as an apparent attempt to avoid being recognized while leaving the area. The children's mother arrived home that evening around 7:20. Some reports place it a few minutes later, around 7:30. But every account agrees on the same brutal window, sometime shortly after 7 in the evening, more than 2 hours after investigators believe the shooting occurred. She walked into her house, expecting an ordinary end to an ordinary day, and found her 2 children already gone. Dispatch audio from that night indicated her 9-year-old son had been found shot in a bedroom, and her 15-year-old daughter had been found shot in the hallway. Charging documents would later clarify that positioning slightly. Giovanna was found lying in bed in her bedroom, while Steve was found between the hallway and a bedroom. Both children were pronounced dead at the scene. Their father arrived at the home sometime after their mother had already made the discovery and called police. Baltimore County Police Chief Robert McCullough addressed reporters that first night. Visibly affected by what he'd seen, he said he had encountered a great deal in his career, but described this as horrific and tragic, adding that it was something that simply doesn't happen in that community. At that early stage, police had no suspects. They asked anyone with information to come forward and offered a cash reward of up to $2,000 through Metro Crime Stoppers of Maryland for tips that could help crack the case. For the public, the days that followed felt like they were crawling by without answers. No suspect named, no arrest, just a steady, quiet acknowledgement from police that the investigation was ongoing. But behind that silence, detectives were doing exactly the kind of methodical work that eventually breaks cases like this open. Investigators pulled surveillance footage from surrounding properties and cross-referenced it with public transit camera systems. They gathered cell phone location data. They collected ballistic evidence recovered from the scene, the kind of forensic detail that can eventually connect casings and projectiles to a specific firearm. And they conducted a long series of interviews with people close to the family, working to establish exactly who had been in and out of that house in the days and weeks before the murders. What all of that work eventually pointed to was not a stranger. It was someone the household already knew, someone who, according to police, had been inside that home just days before the shootings occurred. According to charging documents, a close friend of Giovanna's, referred to in the paperwork simply as a witness, told police that Giovanna had been talking to a boy named Keith for several weeks leading up to the murders. The two reportedly met in person for the first time at Giovanna's home on July 4th, 3 days before she and her brother were killed. That same friend told investigators she had been on a FaceTime call with the two of them that day, and that during the call, she could see Keith in bed with Giovanna, holding a handgun. The friend also told police that Keith had threatened to kill Giovanna if she ever, in his words, messed around with any other guys. That's not a rumor secondhand from the grapevine. Police say they later recovered a text message that appeared to confirm Giovanna had relayed that exact threat to her friend, along with additional messages, allegedly sent from Keith directly, that echoed the same warning. The friend also told investigators that Giovanna had mentioned Keith was planning to come back to her house again on July 7th. That is the same date the murders took place. Police Chief McCullough told reporters he could not say with certainty whether the relationship between the two of them was romantic or simply a friendship. But whatever label applies, the pattern laid out in those documents, a new connection, a firearm displayed within days of meeting, a threat rooted in jealousy and control, is one that advocates who work in teen relationship violence say they recognize immediately, and one they say should have been treated as a warning sign long before it became a headline. One of the hardest parts of this case to sit with is the presence of Steve Allen in it at all. He was 9 years old. Nothing in the case, as described by police, connects him to any conflict, relationship, or tension involving the suspect. And yet he was found dead in the same house, near the same hallway, at what investigators believe was around the same time as his sister. Police have said they believe Steve was killed because he was a witness, an innocent bystander, in Chief McCullough's own words, to whatever happened inside that house that evening. Not a target in his own right, but someone who was present, who may have seen or heard something, and who could not be allowed to describe it to anyone afterward. If that theory holds up in court, it means a 9-year-old lost his life not because of anything he did, but simply because he happened to be home when his sister's world collided with someone else's rage. On July 22nd, more than 2 weeks after the killings, Baltimore County Police announced they had made an arrest.
We've made an arrest, and the July 7th, homicide.
16-year-old Keith Maurice James Jr. arrested, charged as an adult in connection with the shooting deaths of 9-year-old Steve Allen and his sister, 15-year-old Giovanna Myrie, Gigi. Baltimore County Executive Kathy Klossmeyer.
Please keep the families in your prayers.
And Councilman Julian Jones standing with the chief Wednesday with word of a break in the case that resonated across the community. A young boy and his sister murdered, now an arrest. The accused, another young teen.
I am just taken back by the fact that young people at the age of 16 years old will not only have access to a gun, but have the propensity to actually murder someone and murder two people. So this is an absolute sad day for all of us here in our community, in our country, that this type of violence takes place and is being perpetrated by young people.
The suspect was a 16-year-old from West Baltimore. Because of the severity of the charges, 2 counts of first-degree murder, along with use of a firearm in the commission of a crime of violence, he was charged as an adult rather than processed through the juvenile system. He was ordered held without bond at the Baltimore County Detention Center. Chief McCullough addressed the arrest at a news conference held at the Randallstown Community Center. He confirmed the suspect was known to both victims, that he had been inside the home before, including on July 4th, and that his relationship with Giovanna appeared to be personal in nature. He credited the arrest to what he called good police work, built on a combination of digital evidence, surveillance footage, and witness cooperation. He also noted that the suspect had initially been one of several people considered in the case, before that evidence narrowed the focus down to one name. That name is Keith Maurice James Jr. His first court appearance came the day after his arrest. He appeared by video inside a Baltimore County courtroom, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, and remained silent throughout the hearing. His attorney waived his right to a bond hearing and instead requested that he be transferred to a secure juvenile facility rather than held in an adult detention setting. The state pushed back, arguing he wasn't eligible for that kind of transfer given the nature of the charges. The judge ultimately denied the request, citing both the seriousness of the allegations and safety concerns for other juveniles who might otherwise be housed alongside him. Investigators have been direct about one thing they still don't know: how a 16-year-old obtained the firearm used in the killings. That question remains publicly unanswered, and it's one that will likely come up again as the case moves further through the courts. As of now, the investigation remains open, and Keith Maurice James Jr. is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty. Everything described here, the FaceTime call, the threats, the surveillance footage, the cell data, is an allegation laid out by police and prosecutors, not yet tested in front of a jury. When detectives eventually sat down with him, the suspect confirmed he knew Giovanna and confirmed he had seen her on July 4th. But he denied being at her home on the night of the murders. That denial is now sitting directly across from a stack of evidence police say tells a very different story. A bus drop-off half a mile away, a phone call placed minutes later, a walk toward the house captured on camera, a neighbor's glance toward the property at 5:08, and a change of clothing and a covered face on the way out. It will be up to a courtroom, not a headline, to decide which version holds up under cross-examination and a much higher standard of proof than what's needed to file a charge. For the people who live on and around Tallis Road, the arrest didn't erase what happened, but it did bring something closer to closure than they'd had in the 2.5 weeks since the murders. One neighbor said she was devastated, absolutely devastated, when she first learned what had happened. Another said she was more shocked than anything else, the kind of shock that comes from realizing something this violent happened just steps from your own front door. A man who lives directly across the street from the victim's home said he wants to see how the case plays out once it reaches a courtroom. He also said what he wants most, more than any particular sentence or outcome, is closure for a family he describes as close to him and to most of the neighbors on that block. Other residents were blunter about what they hope happens if the case results in a conviction, with some saying outright that they believe whoever is responsible should never be released. More than a week after the killings, family and friends gathered at St. Casimir Church on O'Donnell Street in Baltimore for a funeral mass. At the family's request, guests wore black and gold, the siblings' favorite colors, rather than traditional mourning black. Giovanna, known to nearly everyone as Gigi, was a student at Western High School, the nation's oldest public high school built exclusively for girls. Classmates and alumni described a school culture built around sisterhood, and that sense of belonging was on full display at her funeral, where students, staff, and graduates from years past came out to honor her. She played golf and had recently taken an interest in karate. One family friend described her as quiet and reserved around people she didn't know well, but said her close friends knew a different side of her, someone who loved trying new things and who took real pride in her appearance, from her nails, to her hair, to her lashes. Friends called her a Western dove, a nod to the school's mascot and the tight-knit identity it gives its students. Steve, just 9 years old, was remembered for his love of Caribbean culture and for spending hours playing Roblox, the kind of ordinary childhood joys that make his loss even harder to reconcile with the violence that ended his life. He also played basketball, wearing the number 22 jersey, a detail his teammates and coaches have held onto in the weeks since his death. The family's statement, shared publicly after the service, said that Steve and Gigi were deeply loved by so many, and that their love, laughter, and beautiful spirits would forever remain in the hearts of those who knew them. The family also thanked the wider community for its outpouring of support, writing that the kindness shown to them had brought comfort beyond words. In the aftermath of the arrest, both law enforcement and advocates working in teen relationship violence have pointed to this case as an example of something larger than one street or one family. The pattern described in the charging documents, a new relationship, a firearm displayed within days, a threat rooted in jealousy, followed by a lethal escalation within a matter of days, is not unique to this case. It shows up again and again in situations involving teen dating violence, except that most of the time, it doesn't end in a double homicide. Most of the time, the warning signs, the possessiveness, the threats, the flashing of a weapon either get noticed by someone who steps in, or they simply don't escalate to gunfire. What made this different was the presence of a gun in the hands of a teenager already displaying controlling behavior. One advocate summarized the danger in blunt terms, with firearms now the leading cause of death among children in this country. An ordinary conflict, a breakup, a jealous accusation, a fight over trust, has the potential to turn into a homicide. That statement isn't meant to explain away what happened to Gigi and Steve. It's meant to widen the lens. This case did not happen in a vacuum. It happened inside a broader reality, where access to firearms among young people has become disturbingly common, and where the emotional volatility that has always existed in teenage relationships now sometimes arrives paired with the means to make a bad moment permanent and irreversible. There's another thread worth pulling on here, and it has less to do with the tragedy itself and more to do with how it was solved. 2.5 weeks might feel like a long time to go without an arrest, especially for a community desperate for answers. But look at what investigators actually assembled in that window. A photo obtained through motor vehicle records, cell tower data tied to a specific phone number, bus surveillance time-stamped down to the minute, neighborhood camera footage, ballistic evidence from the scene, and a network of witness statements that had to be gathered, verified, and cross-checked against each other. That combination, digital location data layered against physical surveillance and human testimony, has become the backbone of modern homicide investigations, especially in cases where the person responsible isn't immediately obvious. A person can deny being somewhere. It's much harder to deny a phone that pinged in the area, a bus camera that caught a distinctive backpack and a pair of light blue headphones, and a second piece of footage showing that same backpack leaving the neighborhood on foot less than an hour later, this time with a hood up and a mask on. It's also worth noting how ordinary most of that evidence was on its own. A bus stop timestamp, a cell tower ping, a neighbor glancing toward a house. None of those things by themselves prove anything. It's only when investigators lined them up next to each other, minute by minute, that a pattern emerged clearly enough to bring before a judge. That's the quiet, unglamorous reality behind most modern homicide cases. It isn't a single dramatic breakthrough. It's dozens of small, mundane data points, a bus camera here, a phone record there, that only become meaningful once someone takes the time to lay them out in order. As it stands, Keith Maurice James Jr. remains in custody, held without bond, charged as an adult with 2 counts of first-degree murder and use of a firearm in a crime of violence. His attorney's attempt to move him into a secure juvenile facility rather than an adult detention setting was denied by the court, with the judge citing both the severity of the allegations and concerns about the safety of other minors who might otherwise be housed alongside him. The investigation, according to police, remains ongoing, and the question of how he obtained the firearm used in the killings has not yet been publicly answered. None of what's outlined in the charging documents, however detailed, however many independent threads of evidence supposedly point in the same direction, amounts to a conviction. That determination belongs to a courtroom, not a headline, and not a video like this one. Keith Maurice James Jr. is entitled to, and remains under, the presumption of innocence guaranteed to anyone accused of a crime in this country, right up until and unless a court finds otherwise. What isn't in question is the outcome that set this entire chain of events in motion. 2 children are dead. A mother came home from an ordinary workday to the worst possible discovery a parent can make. A community that thought of itself as quiet and unremarkable had to reckon, almost overnight, with the reality that violence doesn't always announce itself in advance, and it doesn't always come from a stranger. Cases like this tend to get remembered in fragments. People will remember that a teenage relationship turned violent. They'll remember a 9-year-old was killed alongside his sister. They'll remember bus footage, a change of clothes, and a mask. But the thing worth sitting with longer than any single detail is how quickly and quietly all of this allegedly built up. A new relationship, a gun shown off on a video call, a threat tied to jealousy. And then, within days, 2 children dead in their own home, a neighbor glancing toward the house at 5:08 in the evening, without any idea what that glance would come to mean. Advocates who work in this space keep coming back to the same warning, and it's worth repeating here plainly, without embellishment. When firearms are easily accessible to young people already showing controlling or threatening behavior in a relationship, the distance between an argument and a homicide becomes terrifyingly short. That's not a statement about this case being typical. It's a statement about how atypical it shouldn't have to be for something like this to happen, and how, increasingly, it doesn't take much for an ordinary conflict to end in a way that can never be undone. If this case moves forward the way most homicide prosecutions do, there will be more hearings, more filings, and eventually a trial where all of this evidence, the FaceTime call, the texts, the bus footage, the cell data, the ballistics, gets tested in front of a judge or jury rather than simply reported by police. We'll be watching that process closely, and we'll bring you the next update as soon as there's something concrete to report.